Welcome everybody to the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting for September 14th, 2021. Ann, could you please call the roll?
I will. Tim Penich.
Here.
Amy Connell-Donahue.
Present.
Andy Duran.
Present.
Mark Barry.
Present.
Ann Hill, present. Carrie Steinbach.
Here.
Lauren Hirsch.
Present.
All right, we've got a quorum. We can begin. Can you all please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We now offer the opportunity for public comment. If anybody would like to address the board, please do so now. Shelley, can you signal us somehow if we have any Zoom comment or written comment?
No written comment and nothing on Zoom either.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on. Now we offer the opportunity for board members to offer a future agenda item if you think there's something that we need to make sure that we get on an agenda, or if there's a brief item you want to discuss tonight, please do so now. If you think of something as you're walking out the door, which is like something I always do, don't hesitate to email me or Lisa at any time with things that we probably should be discussing. Lisa and I do have something kind of like a president's report, superintendent report that we want to discuss. We attended a really interesting workshop with the District 115 board last night called A Portrait of a Graduate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Lisa's gonna give you guys an overview of that, and then I will chime in with any color that I can come up with.
Yeah, so we were really excited to be invited to this workshop opportunity with the District 115 board. There were some representatives there from District 57 as well in Lake Forest. And the proposal is to work jointly on a portrait of a graduate for the three districts to come together and sort of go through a process that would be facilitated by a third party that would involve all sorts of stakeholders. They're looking at a very big group that would include half community members and half staff members, so comprised of a very diverse group of voices to pull together the community's thoughts about what we want for our graduates beyond academic success. So we're talking about critical thinking, 21st century skills, moving towards deeper learning for all of our students. And obviously the benefit of doing this together as three districts is alignment of goals. And then taking that portrait and kind of walking ourselves backwards to what this might look like for an 8th grader, what it might look like for a 5th grader, 3rd grader, et cetera. So they're looking to be as inclusive as possible, to utilize technology, make sure that everyone has a voice in the process. It would be a total of 4 meetings. And essentially, and I think there would be some opportunities in between for the team to give feedback. This particular third-party resources worked with other North Shore districts and other districts in Illinois.
It's an organization called Battelle.
Battelle for Kids. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Montgomery has worked with them as well in Revere. In
prior district.
Yep. And so there were some question and answer. There was some questions about what would the role of the board be, and you know, what would exactly the process be, and how would it be facilitated? I think some of that would have to come through the process. Some of that would be, you know, once they decide to move forward with it, and 67 and 65 decide whether or not we want to move forward with it, then that would be part of our administrative planning to think about what that could look like, you know, how we want to be involved, how the board might want to be involved.
My sense was that if any of you guys have sat through our strategic planning or with strategic planning with the village, maybe it's a very similar kind of feel. Stakeholder groups are organized, and their hopes and dreams for student success are kind of whittled down to a final report.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, sort of a one-pager, and it really then can be unpacked from there, and the feedback would be taken into consideration when we look at maybe benchmark assessments or projects or things that we would want for our students to do in order to measure our progress toward those goals. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us. And Mark and I wanted to bring it to you for your feedback. Obviously, nothing's been decided yet, but at the very least, the door's open for collaboration, I think. And
my big takeaway was, I don't know if you guys, at least I know Andy and Ann have heard me moaning and groaning about articulation with the high school since they've been on the board, and it's been something I've been complaining about, or the lack of articulation with the high school since I've been on the board, since 2011. We have struggled forever to really work in a very organized, consistent manner. We do articulate, we have done, to Nate's credit for the relationships he's built over there have been tremendous, but it's always ad hoc. It's not, we're going to do this every year in this date at this time. And this is the first time at a board level, at a administrative level, when I had meetings with these people, that I've ever seen intentional discussion about collaboration between the district, that they didn't use the word articulation. And that's great. Maybe that's all we needed to do all along, was just not use that word and talk about building a portrait of a graduate. But it was the first time I saw those doors open. And Dr. Montgomery seemed to be talking the talk, at least, about how this was a priority of his. And several of his board members came up to me and said, see, we're listening, we're doing this. So this is the first time I've heard this since I've been on this board. And I feel really, really great about at least that door opening. I think the specific program they're looking at seemed pretty good. I think that's more Lisa's world, to make sure to vet that and make sure that and recommend it. But in terms of board level stuff, and it's like it's our job to make sure that our district works with the high school. And I think this is a really great first step. I was super happy about that. There was another point that I was going to make, and it has evaporated. And so I'll come back to it if I think of it. But it was very encouraging. Oh, I know what it was. So they produce a document, right? This vision, or the roadmap, portrait of a graduate. And then so I asked the question, so what then? Right? We have got this portrait that doesn't do us anything unless we actually do something with it. And they also offer a service where they come back later and work with the administrative teams on how to work that backwards into all of our curriculum programming, curriculum mapping. And so we talked about going all the way back through grade school, and how 67 and 65 maybe need to be working closer together to vision what does kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade look like to get up into the high school. Because the portrait of a graduate, I think, is really a portrait of a high school graduate, is what they're envisioning. But you've got to plan all the steps. And so this just lays the initial groundwork for some really great collaboration. So I was really encouraged by all that.
Can I ask a question on it?
Yeah.
Is the vision similar to like a social contract between our districts, that they're going to follow through as much as we're going to follow through on the portrait?
I think accountability is something we'll need to talk about.
Yeah.
And that would be something that the high school would be able to look at in terms of their 4 years. And, as Dr. Montgomery talked about, and then we talked about separately, the accountability measures are embedded in the strategic plan. And so that might be a way that we could also look at re-envisioning our strategic plan and aligning it with the portrait as well. So that sort of all those measures are aligned. We're all working towards the same thing. And then how that's to be communicated out, how do we determine whether or not we're making progress? He was very intentional about talking. This is sort of like a North Star. You never reach it, but you can always be pointing yourself in that direction and getting really clear about what all that means. I've been very lucky, obviously so lucky to have Kelly still with us and working closely with me on curriculum, with Nate, have already touched base with the curriculum directors in 67 and 115. So as a group, we all know the power of what this can do for our kids coming into 115, and then that they could take our students from where we leave off and kind of move them towards that North Star even further.
I would add that the conversation did lead specifically toward embedding this in strategic planning. Like the high school, nobody knew this. There was a collective gasp in the room. They don't have a strategic plan, which is, how is that possible? But anyways, another conversation. And then the 67 sounds like they've got a pretty solid strategic plan. We have one, but we're sort of work well on our way toward working our way through it. So either it needs to be redone or refreshed, and the perfect opportunity to embed the portrait of a graduate stuff in there. And if the other 3 districts commit to that, and it would naturally involve collaboration with us between the 3 districts, I think that's pretty close to a contract that would make sure that this stuff gets done on a regular basis. So I was really encouraged.
To this point, how much, and do we even know, like a second grade 67 class in a second grade, 65 class curriculum wise, how similar, do we have a feel for how similar that is coming in? Have we worked on that previously?
So there
Or just-
definitely has been work done in that area. And I think as we move forward with new leadership in both places, some of our folks have been here, some folks are new. We need to get back to a conversation on that, especially even without new people, just new circumstances. I mean, we're coming out of this 18-month, time period in which we have the opportunity to baseline again and take a look at what we think our kids need and what we need to do to prepare them to move forward. I mean, the conversation was really relevant last night when we think about how things have changed in the last 18 months and really even preparing kids for the future 18 months ago looked different than it looks now. And so even as much articulation as we've done in the past, it needs to be revisited. And we need to take a look at that with a fresh set of eyes.
And I think I would be really surprised if either district wanted to align grades curricularly one-to-one,
Sure.
identically. Every school, every district's unique. There's different things everybody wants to accomplish. But I think as long as they're at the same point heading into high school, roughly,
Yeah.
with the same background and skill sets, then that's probably a good thing.
I think this sounds really encouraging.
I was happy. Oh, there is a financial commitment.
Yes.
We expect that it's about $10,000 per district.
We would be splitting it evenly between the three districts.
Any other questions?
So with your permission, we'll keep going in the conversation.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Great.
Jay, can you figure that out?
Jane knows.
Jane, can you find us some money?
I see him looking at his
You
money.
can't tell because he has a mask on, but he's not surprised.
All right, we're going to move into discussions, and we're going to start with an old favorite. We've done this for probably 5, 6, 7 years now. I'm not really sure. The Lake Bluff Library Intergovernmental Agreement Renewal. It's an annual renewal we brought to the board on September 28th for final approval. Andy and Ann have seen this. Some of you newer guys may not be familiar with it, but the genesis of this started when we realized that the Lake Bluff Library was not available to kids in Knollwood or in unincorporated Lake Bluff because they were not part of the village. And so we wanted to make the library available to them year round, including the summer. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm overstepping here. And so we worked with, the library was all over it. They're like, that makes total sense. Let's figure out a way to do that and get those kids library cards or whatever they need. And our lawyers developed this contract to work together for a total cost of about $1,000 for all those kids to arrange for them to have access to the library year round. So. that cover it?
Nothing to add. I think it's a great program. I would appreciate.
So we're not voting on anything tonight, but this is going to come up again. So if anybody has any questions, feel free.
I have one question, that it stops at 8th grade. So is there a similar program for the high schoolers so that we still cover our kids after?
Good
That
question.
is a good question.
That's a good question.
Library is very important.
I will bring it up.
That's a good question. I
Because
don't know.
if it is only $1,000, I would like to suggest that we do some continuing ed for them, just so that they have a place that they can also study, take out references. if they even do
Yeah,
that
nobody's ever asked that
anymore.
question. We've been doing this a while. So
Yeah.
that's a good question.
Next agenda item with 115. Thank you.
Just as a sidebar, the issue is not without some controversy. There's 1 or 2 people in the community who have discussed at length why they didn't feel this was appropriate, but that nearly didn't really go anywhere. So,
It's a great program.
yeah. Any other questions? We good? All right, item B is the 7th grade outdoor education trip update. And I believe Mr. Blackmer is going to give us an update on that.
He is.
The table was a great idea until I tried to get out. from behind.
Limbo.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thanks for having me back. It's nice to be here in person for sure. Wanted to just talk a little bit about outdoor ed, which has been sort of a longstanding tradition for our 7th grade students. You may recall it involved an overnight trip. We would traditionally break our 7th grade into 2 groups. Half the group would participate in what we called Lake Bluff Ed, while the other half was in East Troy, Wisconsin at Camp Edwards. Halfway through, they would switch. Certainly in the age of COVID, the overnight piece was something that caused us concern. But at the same time, thinking about the age of COVID and trying to do as much of what we have normally and traditionally done as possible, outdoor ed seemed like a real opportunity to get back into something that looked a little bit more normal. And so what our team has been working on is an alternate plan that involves still going to East Troy, Wisconsin, still going to Camp Edwards, and doing almost all of the things that we would have usually done simply without the overnight piece. And we've looked at two sort of basic frameworks for that. We're still trying to kind of gauge what level of participation we might be able to get out of this. The expectation would be that all seventh graders would participate. We would still break the kids in half. It makes for a more manageable group at the activities at Camp Edwards. We have reserved space at the camp. We did this last year, imagining that we'd be able to pull off the trip. And so November 1st, September 31st, those are the 2 days. Excuse me, September 30th and November 1st are the 2 days that we'd reserved. We've also planned to do the Lake Bluff education piece in the morning with the kids that remain behind on the first day, and then have worked with Bernie's Book Banks for a service project in the afternoon with our kids. And then we would switch activities the next day. So students who are at East Troy would come back and do the Lake Bluff Ed portion. I'll come back and explain the Lake Bluff Ed piece in a little bit more detail, just so you understand what that looks like. But the two sort of concepts that we had in mind both involved leaving a little bit earlier than the start of our normal school day, 7:45. We have a schedule that would allow us to actually be back at the building at our normal dismissal time at 3:30. That comes at a slightly reduced cost. We're looking at about $30 per student in order to make that work. We also have a plan for a slightly longer day that gives us more activity. So just so you know, that first kind of 7:45 to 3:30 piece would involve a meal at the camp, but also 3 of our activity periods that we would have already usually done. If we extend the day a little bit and bring kids back in the early evening, 8:30 would be an anticipated arrival home. We can actually double that to get to be about 6 activities, I think, which would be ideal. We definitely have staff who are interested in extending that period of time and being there back-to-back days. The 7th grade team and our fine arts team members that help to facilitate that are very excited to bring it back. It does increase the cost a little bit. We're looking at about $45 in that scenario, just simply because we need staff at camp also to help us with the ropes course and some of the other technical things that we do that are not necessarily what our staff does, but we have a well-trained group of chaperones that do all of the other activities that are there.
Nate, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is that fee, help refresh my memory, is that fee something that the district picks up or parents pick up?
So typically the families will pay for that, and we provide financial assistance for the families that need it. If you were to go back to the typical kind of 3-day, two halves broken, it's usually $150 per family in that case. So we were able to reduce the cost considerably without the overnight piece to it. We also don't have a meal included in that, so there's some savings there. As a refresher for those who maybe either knew of or weren't aware of what Lake Bluff Ed involves, we worked with actually Kathy O'Hara to develop a Lake Bluff historic walking tour. And if you're familiar with the concept of geocaching, in essence, there are different locations around town with little pencil cases, labeled, identified, safe, nothing to be worried about, but we always push out to the community before we do it that they may find these boxes if they're out walking the dog. Inside, however, is an artifact, a unique stamp that they use to stamp their passport to prove that they've found their location. And actually, as the students are moving through Lake Bluff, they're recording their own experience and voice and talking a little bit about each site that they visit. So it's a fun morning. It's a morning activity that allows them to learn a bit more about the community that we live in. It is a walking tour, and for that piece, we do also request some parent volunteers to help us with chaperoning. And then, as I already mentioned, an afternoon sort of service piece with Bernie's Book Bank. So this is the concept that we have kind of worked up, and what I'm excited about is that it really does, in both scenarios, mimic a lot of what we were able to do in the years past.
Kathy O still involved?
I believe she is. She usually likes to say hi at the end of the tour and talk a little bit about, they'll go into the Bleat Center and get a little bit more information. And
She's got her new niece. She might be out there.
she may be out there running with us. I don't know. I don't know. Happy to answer any questions you might have, though.
I don't have a question, but I'm excited that the kids will get this opportunity this year.
What is the tipping point to decide between the short version and the long version of Camp Edwards?
We need to just verify who we have in terms of chaperones and make sure that we've got enough to do it. I think we do. I think the only real issue for us is family conflicts. If they have sporting events or practices or something that can't be missed. Given that there's 2 days, we've always been able to work with families. If, for example, they couldn't do the 1st, but could do September 30th, we'll definitely work around those things if need be. There are some circumstances where we've had families actually drive up to East Troy and pick kids up early. We also can do this with 1 less bus since we don't have all the luggage. So that's another savings, Jay.
How far is that drive up to East Troy?
By school bus, it's about, I usually bank on an hour, but you can almost do it in 45 minutes if there's not any construction.
Any other questions?
Thank you for being
Thanks.
creative.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it.
Exciting.
And it is due to the fact that it will be outdoors. It'll be an opportunity for us to interact with kids without the masks
Yeah.
on. So looking forward to that as well.
That's great.
Thanks, Nate.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 6C. Mr. Khan is going to talk to us about the Olson Transportation Driver Incentive Bonus discussion. Administration is recommending that the board approve a bus driver bonus program for drivers employed by our third-party contractor Olson Transportation as a way to attract and retain quality drivers. There is a memo in your board packet outlining all of this.
So just a little bit of background. It has been difficult to find bus drivers for the past several years, even before COVID. COVID has made it significantly more difficult. Many drivers are older and have either retired or chosen not to drive due to the pandemic. But it has been, there's also significant cost in just training new drivers. Whenever you get a new driver, there's a lot of classes they need to take, safety training and things like that. So it's expensive to continually have to hire new drivers. We share Olson Transportation with several other districts. The 2 Lake Forest districts and Deerfield are the primary customers. And Deerfield had come up with this innovative bonus plan many years ago, and they've actually had some very good success with it. They bring back their drivers every year. So Olson basically has been asking us for many years to come on board. And this year they asked again and said, we really don't have enough drivers. We would like to have 1 more bus this year just for crowding. And we really couldn't do it because we didn't have enough drivers. So the bonus is based on longevity. There's an incentive if you've driven before and you come back the next year, that's part of the bonus. Based on safety. So if drivers have a good safety record, they get another portion of the bonus. Also attendance, when drivers are absent, it's very disruptive. They need to put in sub drivers. I understand that currently in order to provide service, the owners are driving, the front office is driving, like everybody who works at the company has their license and is driving because when people are out, they still need the buses to run. So attendance to incentivize that is very important. And then, just adhering to the planned routes and stops, being courteous to parents, like things like that. So this is something that is relatively inexpensive. And I think it has shown that hopefully we'll get better service, and it has shown we have better attendance, and they're looking for different ways to attract new drivers because you can only increase the pay so much, but this is a nice incentive. So they asked us if we would do that for the drivers this year, and we're bringing it to you for approval. The total cost would be for the 9 drivers, less than $25,000. It's a little bit more than 3% of our total transportation expense.
So I do have a question, and just for context, I know in June of last year, we were asked to authorize over almost 60,000 of financial support to Olson to help them float through the pandemic. And I guess adding this on, I'm in support of it because the administration is saying it's important, but I guess what I want to know moving forward is like, this is now over 80,000 between the two. And I guess what is our responsibility in making sure that this for-profit company stays afloat? Why is it our business if they're to
Right.
incentivize their drivers? I guess moving forward, what else is going to maybe come down the pipe more than we already?
Yeah, no, I would say that this issue that we're seeing is not isolated to Olson Transportation. School districts who hire their own drivers are having difficulty. Every contractor out there is having difficulty. So it's something that if this contractor could not provide the drivers, we really don't have another option to go to another company because they are also struggling to find drivers. So it's really in our best interest to do it. I think the money that we paid Olson Transportation in the past was something that all school districts were doing simply because, I think the edict from the government was, and from the governor was to, pay your own employees. And then there was something in there about contractors also kind of as a condition for getting support and for just supporting everybody through the pandemic. We were not required to pay it, and we negotiated it down to a pretty reasonable amount to basically just pay their overhead to carry them through. So, again, I think without that support, they would probably not be around and we would be looking for another bus company.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I guess my question is, do we foresee, it seems like they have us a bit over a barrel because it seems like they ask and we have to do it. Like how do we stop that cycle, I guess is the question.
Yeah, and this is not something we have to do. I think this is something that, so the Deerfield district has been doing it for a while. Lake Forest was on board with it. So we're also competing for drivers kind of within Olson against those other districts, and all three other districts have agreed to do this. So that's just another.
I think you bring up a good point though, Andy, and I am in favor of doing this. I think I understand the need for it and it seems reasonable. But I think as a board, we need to be cognizant of possibly needing to draw a line at some point.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just have to consider what the alternatives are.
Sure. Yeah, I totally get that. I just,
That was going to be my question. What is the alternative?
There really
There is
isn't
none.
one.
There
It's,
is. That's the problem,
buying
right?
buses and finding a place to park them and hiring
We're
drivers.
gonna
and
start a
training
busing
them.
company.
Yeah.
maybe.
I think, I mean, and I would say even when I first started transitioning into the district, Jay was working with Olson and the other districts to figure out how we were even gonna, manage last year. And some of the situations that neighboring districts find themselves in right now, who either have their own busing companies or are dealing with other busing companies. I mean, we are in really good shape. And I know Jay's been working really hard with Olson. And Olson has been working really hard to make that happen. So it's frustrating. I know it's frustrating for everybody. We have been brainstorming some other thoughts about schedules or the schedules between the three districts, and we may be bringing you some thoughts. But right now there is just a shortage in these positions and we just want to make sure our kids get to school. So, but we appreciate that question and
Yeah.
we'll keep it in mind. for
And,
sure.
and really every contract that's been negotiated with a bus company after COVID has included some kind of clause for paying for days where the school was closed. And we actually don't have that in our contract. We pushed back on that and said no to that. So that is a case where they were asking for basically the same treatment going forward and we held firm on that. So.
And do we picture down the road passing that cost on? I know, at one point we didn't charge for buses and then we needed to because it wasn't in the budget. Do we have any idea the effect that would take on future chargings of buses? Or we?
I don't see this particular program increasing the cost of the fees. I mean, currently, the fees subsidize the buses only a little bit. We still pay for the majority of the buses through property taxes and other revenue.
And we charge less than most of our comparable
Yes.
districts.
So, I mean, the fee is really there just as a way to ensure that the people who really need the bus are taking the bus, and that the people who have other means or other options, it's kind of an incentive. So, do I really want to spend the money on that, or can I drive them to keep the ridership so we can keep our buses full and efficient?
That makes sense.
My 2 cents is I'm a user of the bus system. I'm appreciative of it, and all of the things that we would give bonuses according to are the things that I look for. I love having the same bus driver, having them be safe. They have my kids the first thing in the morning and the last thing in the day, and those buses can get rowdy. So I appreciate it, and I would love to see our bus driver again. So.
I still remember my bus drivers when I was a kid. They had an impact on my life.
I bet. We had
Um,
the same one in our route since my 8th grade. I was in kindergarten. He's still there. Carlos, he's amazing.
Bob is my guy. Just as a dose of perspective, this is a national issue. This is not just here. I just read an article this morning. Massachusetts, did you see this?
No, I did not.
It brought up their National Guard. They made National Guard CDL drivers with guardsmen with CDLs, the drivers with the license they need, to then take training to be bus drivers that are going to be distributed across the state of Massachusetts. It's that bad.
It's really difficult right now.
Yeah. So,
Appreciate.
any other questions for Jay?
Thanks for that perspective,
No.
Jay. I want to make sure I raise the question, but
Yeah.
I understand what it. So thanks for.
Thanks
walking
for
through
raising
that.
the question. It's very.
All right, so now Dr. Leali and her team are going to present the student growth and achievement presentation. I believe.
Yes.
Is it both you,
and-
Tracy, and
yes,
you?
Tracy and I
Okay.
are going to present this
Okay.
together, and I'm going to give her a second to get situated. We're excited to give this presentation because we were not able to last year because the data was so sparse. But we are bringing to you as much data as we can at this point on strategic plan goals 1 and 6. 6 is an addition. We'll talk about that in addition to this presentation. And then we are going to be ending with some action steps for this year. So Tracy?
It's great to see you all live and in person. So as Dr. Leali said, each year we will present on our strategic plan to the board. And last year we were unable to do so due to the pandemic and not being able to collect the data that we normally collect. Now, this past school year, we were able to collect some of those pieces of data. So we're able to look at some of our student growth and achievement during that time. And then we also have our new HumanX survey that gave us some data on board goal 6. So just as a reminder and a refresher here on our mission and vision, and that we keep our mission and vision at the core of our work each day.
So in our strategic plan, you've outlined 6 goals that we think are important. And ultimately, the reason that we report on goal 1 every year is because that's our ultimate obligation, is to ensure that all of our students are growing and achieving. So that's sort of like we're going to talk about leading and trailing indicators. That's the end of the line. We want to make sure that's happening for all students. And the rest of the goals are sort of the leading indicators that are going to get us to achieve goal 1. And so we talk a lot about long-term fiscal stability and efficiency. We report on that a lot. We talk about how we just talked about being a community partner. Parent and family engagement is something we've been working on. But really, when we think about a leading indicator this year coming out of the pandemic, goal 6 is the really important one of making sure that we're creating a climate and culture that is going to get us to strong learning outcomes and achievement and growth. And so that's why we've added goal 6 to this presentation. And really, in the next slide, we just want to make sure that we talk through, not every piece of data that we have is the end of the line. There's a lot that we can talk about. There's a lot to the story, a lot of variables that get us to student achievement and growth. And MAP is a great piece of data. We're going to talk a lot about that. The state standardized assessment is not data that we have right now, nor is it really actionable data at this point in the year anyway. And so we're going to focus on MAP as our student achievement and growth piece. We're going to talk a lot about different ways that we use that data. But I want to stress, we have a comprehensive assessment system and data system here in Lake Bluff, and we use a lot of data that we don't talk about all the time. So on the next slide.
Can I ask a quick
Yes,
question?
yes,
before?
please. Go ahead.
So just for everybody listening, MAP is,
We're going to talk
I'm not
about it.
I'm not going to say it's instantaneous, but it's real time.
Yep.
Right? And the state testing, when we do it, is you don't get it for months and months and months, right?
Nope.
So it's hard
It is.
to be actionable with that.
It is definitely the most trailing of all the trailing indicators. So we can use it for programmatic improvement.
And historically, it's changed like almost every year. Like
Yeah.
they keep modifying the test, so you can't compare to the prior year.
Right.
So
And in a district like ours, we are a high achieving district. I mean, that's the end of the story. And so the state standardized tests are not going to really tell us about how we're doing and how we're progressing. We can disaggregate it. We can talk about MAP data, which is a little bit more formative and actionable. But ultimately, we need to be measuring ourselves against a higher standard than the state standardized assessments. But we also have these other indicators. And I don't want to focus completely on MAP without talking about the other data that are used within our buildings every day. Our teachers are consistently implementing curriculum-based measures, and those things are tied very, very closely to instruction. So those are the quizzes and tests and projects and writing samples and rubrics that we're implementing all day long that are tied to what the learning targets are each day for students. We have other systems that we use for progress monitoring like STAR, and then systems that are attached to interventions that we might be doing with students or enrichment activities that can monitor progress on a more formative basis. And then obviously for our students with IEPs, they have individualized goals and benchmarks. They're meeting multiple times a year. So there's lots of data in this picture. So we're going to focus in on MAP because it gives us an easy way to talk about how things are going, but there's much more data out there that we're using to inform instruction on a daily basis.
All right, so we're going to dig into board goal 1, which is all students experience a high quality educational program that allows them to achieve and grow. So you will see the metrics that we use in order to show whether or not our students are either growing towards our goals or reaching our goals that we have set by our strategic plan. And so we utilize the services of ECRA as our data management partner to determine our growth scores based on our MAP data. We have achievement and subgroup data from the Illinois Assessment of Readiness that will also present today from 2019, not 2020. And we also have some achievement data based on our MAP scores. We utilize our IAR data because that really breaks down our subgroup data. So you'll see some of our metrics here are for our EL subgroup, our special education subgroup, and our low income subgroup. And so we can use some of that data for those to look at those groups. All right. So a little background on NWEA MAP. So NWEA stands for Northwest Evaluation Association. MAP is the measures of academic progress. And Writ is an equal interval scale that measures your student's growth score. And so you'll see, if you see a MAP report, every student gets a Writ score, and then 2 scores a little bit lower, a little bit higher, and shows kind of their range of achievement. So a little bit about the assessment. It's grade independent and Common Core aligned in the areas of reading comprehension and math. It's administered now to all students in grades kindergarten through 8. So that is a change of 2 years ago where we used to give the STAR assessment to kindergartners and first graders. So now everyone in the district takes the same assessment. In general, we take that assessment 3 times per year. We take it in the fall. Our students are taking it right now, in the winter, and then again in the spring. It's a computerized assessment, and results aren't available instantly, but they're available within 24 hours. As Mark was saying, we can wait months and months to receive our IAR scores. The next day, our teachers can have our MAP scores. And then, as I said before, they're measured in equal interval units called Writ points. All right, so why do we use MAP? We use MAP for a number of reasons. It's both formative and summative in nature. It's standards aligned. As we said, it's aligned to those Common Core standards. It's very easy to administer. Whole classes can take it at the same time, whole grade levels. We can even have the whole building take it at the same time if we're able to have enough proctors.
Can I ask I hope it's just a basic question. Can you define for us the difference between formative and summative?
Yeah, sure. So a formative assessment is it's usually a quick assessment that's given. It can be a classroom-based assessment or a district assessment that gives us information quickly, and it's aligned to our curriculum. So often you might hear a teacher talk about an exit slip. They might give a student or a group of students a question that they answer really quickly right before they leave the classroom. That just gives the teacher a snapshot of what they learned that day. A quiz might be a formative assessment where a teacher can look at some data real time to make some instructional decisions for the next day, week to come. A summative assessment is something like an end of unit test or something like the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. that you take at the end of something, and it gives you an idea of what your students have learned either throughout that entire unit, throughout that entire year.
Thanks.
Let's see, so we can gather multiple data points. MAP has been given over 20 years to different schools nationwide, and so they've gathered quite a bit of data, and they're able to norm that large sample so that we can compare our students to students in Illinois, to students nationwide, to see how they're doing. All right, so MAP is an adaptive assessment. So students are given questions, and the question they receive after that is dependent on how they answered that first question. So if they answer a question correctly, they might get a question that is a little bit harder than the previous question. If they answer it incorrectly, they might get a question that is a little bit easier so that we can get that range of scores for students. Great. So we use the MAP assessment for a number of reasons. So the first would be student benchmarking. That's that 3 times throughout the year to see how our students are growing and achieving. It helps us to ensure our students are on track with our curriculum. So our teachers may ask, are our students learning from our curriculum? And MAP may be able to help us with that question. It measures the growth using a standardized measure. So our teachers can ask, are our students growing, and at what rate are they growing? And then it provides us a universal screening. So our teachers can ask, do our students need, or are there groups of students who need additional intervention? We also utilize our MAP data for our licensed staff. This is required as part of their evaluations, and as administrators, it's part of our evaluations as well. And so ECRA provides us our growth data that we put in our evaluations. All right, so MAP testing looked a little bit different during COVID last year. So last year, students were able to complete the test in person. They were invited in if they were remote students, or they had the option to take the test remotely, which obviously if they were taking it in their home, that changed the test environment a bit. If they were in school or in person taking the testing environment was still different. They were seated 6 feet apart. They had the shields on their desks. They had their masks on. And so it still was a slightly different testing environment than we would typically see. Students in primary grades K and 1 did not take the MAP in the fall. Kindergartners also did not take the MAP in the spring. So both of those grades would have typically taken that MAP assessment 3 times per year. During the winter assessment, the MAP was only given to students who we needed to do a checkpoint because of their interventions that they were in the process of receiving, to see if they were growing, if they could be exited from intervention, if students needed additional intervention. And those were the only students who took it in the winter. And then one other thing to note is that during that time, MAP changed the norms. So the scores look a little bit different. If you had some older children come through the district, you might see a score of 229 in a certain grade. Now it doesn't mean the same thing as a 229 in that same grade. So the norms are a little bit different than they were before.
So we can't compare over time.
So MAP has a way to kind of align some of that so that they can do some of that for us, and ECRA helps us with that. But we can't just look at the scores ourselves from a few years back and compare it. That's what we use our data partners for.
There's definitely going to be an asterisk next to any data from the last 2 years.
And then you'll see in the results here that second grade is not included. Second grade, not only was it renormed, but the test itself was actually changed. And so they cannot do an apples to apples comparison for second grade. So it won't be until next year, when our students take it this year, that we'll actually be able to get growth scores for that grade level and can get back on track with our reporting on second grade. All right, so who are we? this is our district demographics from the 2020 school report card. So with No Child Left Behind, that was passed in the early 2000s, districts started to report subgroup information to be able to identify how students are achieving within those subgroups. And we continue to collect that data to this day. So this is what our current data looks like. Our 2021 report card has not been released yet. And so once we have that information, we can share that as well.
Do you happen to know, this is a little bit of a sidebar and I didn't ask this in advance, so I apologize, that at 857 total enrollment seems really low. Is that trending? Is that low compared to prior years?
And I thought we used to be up by about 900.
Yeah, yes, I would say it hasn't, I don't know that it's gone down every single year, but I do know that it is lower than even 3 and 4 years ago.
Some of the old numbers back in the early 2000s, I remember seeing it start at like 1,100, 12, almost 1,200 kids, I think.
It's bounced between 850 and 900 for the last.
Oh, it has been below 9? Okay.
Mhm. All right, so ECRA has a growth model that takes students' previous data and then determines how many Writ points a student will increase over the coming year. And that's how they determine their expected growth over the year. Now, this chart shows you what percentage of students met or exceeded their expected growth throughout the last year. And this one is in the area of math. Now, we are looking for at least 50% of our students to meet the expected growth throughout the year. This chart shows us the same information, but in the area of reading. You'll note that our math scores, or this percentage of students who grew at an expected rate in math, was a little bit lower than in reading. One of the reasons that that may be is that many students by second grade have learned the basic foundational skills of reading. And through just continued reading and discussion of books, they'll continue to grow within that reading. We know math has skills and concepts that build upon each other each year. And so when we had those breaks and times away from school because of COVID, we know that some of those math concepts, children are struggling with a little bit more due to some of that instruction being missed at the end of the 2020 school year.
So Tracy, can I ask that? That's what I wanted to clarify. I think you just said this, but so these are the 2020 assessment.
These are from the past school year. So we have the 2021 school year, but the gap was the end of the 1920 school year when we were out from March until June. And we weren't delivering instruction remotely in the same way that we were last school year.
And so because of that is why these numbers are maybe lower than we would expect them or want them to be?
So that would be one of the reasons that we would speculate that they are a little bit lower. The other reason would just be that we did have a different school year last year. Our day was shorter. And so there wasn't as much time for instruction in the classroom. We were on a remote platform and some students were remote, some students were in the classroom. And so the ability to pull small groups and do that one-to-one conferencing, while that ability was still there, it was a little bit more challenging for teachers to do. And so there's a couple of reasons, but I think many of them pandemic related as to why our scores are lower than we would historically have seen them.
So that would suggest that if that theory is correct, then when we compare this year, the 2022 numbers to the 2021 numbers, we should see an improvement just because it's closer to normal.
Mark, you're jumping to our action steps.
Oh,
All right. So that would be the idea. Yep. That would be the idea, hopefully. All right. So the next slide is the students who are achieving in the average to above average range. So we set a benchmark of the 50th percentile on MAP, and this is the percentage of students that met that benchmark in achievement, not in growth. And then again, this is in reading.
Can you go back and
Yep.
show those two again? I'm sorry, that was too fast for me.
Yep, no problem. Do you want me to go back to the math first?
Yeah. Can you show both?
Sure.
Percent students achieving.
We're talking about the difference between growth and a benchmark achievement level.
Yeah.
So the growth would be, did they grow enough compared to what we expected them to do? And this is, did they get to the 50th percentile or above? And this is the percentage of students that met that benchmark of average or above average in math.
And then this is in reading.
Nope, that's growth, Tracy.
Oh, I went
You
backwards.
move forward to 18.
Yep. There we go.
So I don't want to beat you to the punchline, so stop me if it's something that you're going to talk about. But so when I see something like this from 5th grade to 6th grade, the numbers are extremely low. So is the idea that we're looking into how we're going to get them caught up for
Yes.
the next year? Like, this is what we use the data
Yep.
for.
So Dr. Leali and I will go over action steps at the end of the presentation that'll talk through both goal 1 and goal 6 on how we're kind of moving forward with this data over the coming year.
And one thing we didn't talk about, which, we want to make sure we're really sensitive about, is that we are a small district. And we don't have large teams of teachers that are responsible for the data that we're talking about. Each of these data points covers 2 school years, so it's 2 teams of teachers, but still we're relatively small. And so we will give time for our teachers and teams to dig into the data more thoroughly. This is an overview, and math gives tons of instructional tools so that they can actually get down to the strands and the standards and talk about how they can differentiate in small groups. So it's difficult sometimes, right? We presented to staff this information. They're aware that we're going to be working on, we started this summer with curriculum adjustments, but then looking at specific students now that they've gotten to know them. But that is the reason that we do this, is that we can actually dig in and support kids with where they're struggling.
Can it break it down to the point where it's like, oh, this section might have been like that March through June that we're continually missing?
Yeah, so on the learning continuum, each student has a Writ range. Each student has a Writ range for each standard set in math and reading. So actually you can drill down to your class, you can take your class and look at Writ ranges by group, and you can take those groups and match those standards, what kids haven't mastered yet, what they've mastered, or what they're working on for the future.
Okay.
So there's tons of tools in here. It all takes time, right? And then it's how do we structure within the day and the lesson to make sure that we're building in the time well for kids. But that's the work.
Are there like automated programming red flags that pop up that say, that sends somebody a note to say, you better check in with this class or student or?
So
is there
yeah.
any of that kind of
Not
algorithm?
quite, but ECRA, our data management partner, we can go into ECRA and then we can see, they do kind of color code it. So we can see a blue is someone who's going above and beyond their expected growth. A green is expected growth, a yellow is below expected, and then a red is kind of in that danger zone. And so we can look at individual students, we can look at grade levels, we can look at the whole district, and they do have that color coding there for us to be able to look at.
And I do want to make sure we go back to, this is one piece of data. And depending on how young the students are, that's how long we can actually use it. We can use it for longer with older students, but with the younger students, this data doesn't stay fresh very long. And so we're looking at starting with this data, then looking at your curriculum-based measures, reading with students, conferencing, workshop methods. I mean, there's been a lot of work in this district, particularly around conferencing and working individually with groups of students and getting the real-time data. So this is a starting place, but then this will adjust, and especially with the younger students.
Yes, and for younger students, MAP says they need to take it their 4th time for it to really be considered like a stable score. That's a really accurate and reliable score. Those first couple of times they're getting used to taking the test. It's probably a longer test than they've taken in the past. They may not have taken a computerized assessment before. And so they have to take it a couple of times before that's considered a really reliable score.
Is this growth or achievement? Or is that something totally?
Yeah, so this is our mean Writ score. So this is basically in grade 3, the average Writ score is 207, which is equivalent to the 65th percentile. So what that shows us is that we have a lot of really high achieving students who are doing very well. And so that impacts our mean Writ score.
So that's different than the achievement of the percentage of students that are average or above average. When you average their Writ scores together, like Tracy said, some of our students are really high performing, really above average. And so we have a mean Writ score or final score on those assessments that's above the 50th percentile in almost every grade. Does that make sense?
Some of what you said made sense. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So I know the Writ, I remember this from prior years. It's kind of a made up measure, but based on the data used to develop a Writ score is, I keep coming back to, it's not growth or achievement based, that's not even an appropriate thing to include in that conversation?
So the Writ score is kind of the raw score of the test, which is a little bit, and then that Writ score can get compared to figure out nationally what percentile is that student at and where are they compared to the norm.
Okay.
So when you really want to look at and drill down to individual students and where they stand in comparison, you want to look at that Writ score as opposed to a percentile. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So again, when you take, again, those previous slides were look at all the students and what percentage of them are average or above average. Average at the 50th percentile or above, that's the percentage. When you take all the Writ scores of all those students then and figure out the average Writ score, we've got a lot of high performing students who have Writ scores that are well above the 50th percentile that then makes that mean Writ score well above the 50th percentile. And that just gives you an idea of where the grade level is at
And
as
so-
an average. Does that make sense?
And then we have the same information. Oh, what just happened to my
So on the
computer?
aggregate, we do have a high performing district. But when you're talking about individual students, we have students that still need support because they're still performing below the 50th percentile. Or they're still not, and we may have students that are well above the 50th percentile that aren't growing the way we want them to grow. So that's why we look at growth and achievement, because you might have high performing kids.
We're slacking.
Well, right, or we haven't supported them well enough to grow.
Right.
So that's why both of those measures need to be taken into account.
So that number that we were just looking at, the national percentile, I mean, it looks good, but you're saying it's weighted a little bit because of our high
Yeah.
performers. Okay.
Yeah. So again, that's where we look at our data and we say, this is a really high achieving district. We have a lot of kids that are out of the box. We can't rest there though. They might be achieving well, and they might also be struggling in certain areas, those high achieving students, and the same for our students who are performing below the 50th percentile, might be growing a tremendous amount for every year, still not making that 50th percentile benchmark, if that makes sense. So there's lots of ways to slice and dice the data when you do a high level overview. Our teachers are digging into different instructional aspects of this story. So they're looking at their class, they're breaking it down by individual, they're looking at the standards, and then they're comparing that to the curriculum so that they can make instructional adjustments.
Sorry about that. My computer.
That's all right. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Yeah. My computer suddenly lost the presentation and was showing a different screen than my computer screen. So something strange is happening.
No, that's weird. Any questions so far on MAP versus the state standardized assessment? Let's try this one. And then this again is more current data. And then we're going to talk about achievement gaps in a minute. That's been the 2019 piece.
My impression is that it's so hard to get meaningful standardized data that you can compare year over year and between students, because even before COVID, we were always having problems with data that just wasn't comparable. And so this is just complicating it even further, that there used to be asterisks. Now there's multiple asterisks and footnotes.
Yes, you're right.
But you can see how helpful it can be.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
when
some
you're-
data is better than no data for sure, as long as you
Right.
know the weaknesses, so you can interpret it through the proper lens.
Definitely.
All right, here's our reading. I just got it back.
It could be easily misinterpreted by somebody just casually looking at it.
Well, yeah, when we get it sent to us, there's a lot of information that we're.
I'm sure it gets reported in the papers and the various school websites that rank schools. They
Mhm.
don't know what they're really looking at. I'm sure that it's too casual to look at it.
So this next set of data is from the Illinois Assessment of Readiness from 2019. In 2020, nobody in Illinois took the Illinois Assessment of Readiness, and in 2021, we haven't received all of our scores yet. So at some point, we will share that information with you, although we did not have a full, not every student in grades 3 through 8 took the IAR this past year. So this is our subgroup data in reading, English language arts. And so you will see over the next 3 slides, our subgroup data broken down comparing various groups. So you see our Hispanic students versus our white students. On the left, in like the more lime green is our district. And then in the darker green on the right is the state average. So on many of these slides, you're going to see, I just lost the presentation again. Hold on.
I'm bored you have this presentation as well. I know.
Yeah.
I'm bored, but-
Resume share. There we go. Okay. So you'll see on many of these slides that our students outperform the state average. However, our subgroup gaps are often larger than the state average. There are some exceptions to that, but overall, our gaps tend to be larger.
Can you explain the graph, just because there wasn't an actual.
Sure.
line?
So, for example, the graph on the left in the lime green color is male students versus female students who took the Reading Illinois Assessment of Readiness. The bottom line are male students in their achievement, which looks around 60% met the achievement score. And then for females, about 74% met the achievement score. So that -14 is the gap between the average scores of those two
With
groups.
the females being.
Mhm.
Just
Right, so females outperformed males.
I was just joking. I just wanted you to say
Like a
that.
summary.
It's grades 3 through 8, because those are the only grades that take the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. And I'm working with ECRA to get some of this subgroup information for our MAP data as well, so that we can have across grade levels and more recent information.
So so we just don't have 2020 achievement gap.
This is
We didn't take the
2019.
assessment in
Some of these
2020.
numbers, the spreads, some of them are huge. The IEP
Mhm.
one, that's scary for those.
Yeah.
kids.
I think what's interesting about this is looking at this achievement gap analysis, it very much drives some of the point you just made, Lisa, where we have very high at the high level, very high scores, but it shows that there are a lot of individual students struggling, which bring the overall benchmark percentage down. So, I mean, it makes total sense. The data seems to.
Right, so if you don't dig into the data in different ways, you might not pick out a pattern that's happening for our students. So you need to look at the data in all of these different ways so that we can really see where our goals are. What do we need to be working on, and where do we need to be really focusing our efforts?
I think it's important that Tracy brought up, this started with No Child Left Behind, this kind of disaggregation of data, and it is for the purpose of equity. And so this equity conversation around achievement has been going on for a really long time. This is not a new discussion, and that we are not unique in having these kinds of achievement gaps. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about achievement equity.
And Tracy, the IEP students are taking the same test regardless of the needs on the IEP, correct?
So it depends. So they could be taking the dynamic learning map, which is aligned to the Illinois Essential Skills standards, and the IAR is aligned to our state standards and to Common Core standards. And so through the IEP process, some students could take the dynamic learning map.
But we don't have that many that take that.
No,
assessment.
usually we have around 5 or so students in the district take that assessment. Now, students with IEPs could also have accommodations and modifications within their IEP, so they could have things like extended time. They could have certain portions of the test read to them. They could allow for the use of graphic organizers. There's many different accommodations and modifications that could be allowed based on IEP team decision when taking the IAR.
And the 504s are not broken out.
The 504s are not broken out in state data,
The other thing.
but
to
that's a
note
good question.
Is that some students might be represented in multiple groups. So the same student may be appearing here in multiple graphs because they're impacted in multiple ways.
But there are no two sets that have the exact same students.
That's right.
So, all right. So our goal is to close these gaps in achievement so that we can raise the achievement scores of the students who are struggling. We don't want to obviously bring down the students who are doing well in order to close those gaps. We want to raise student achievement up.
Quick question, is this, some of this is what's going to be presented at Thrive?
Yes, so
Yes.
we're going to take, actually, the slides that you just saw with data are going to be presented tomorrow night to that group as well, along with some research.
Is the goal just any percentage closure, or do we have like a hard number, like, there's 43%, we want it?
So that's something our administrative team will start to plot out. We want to obviously close those gaps as quickly as possible, but some of these gaps are large. And so it may take some time to completely close them, but the goal would be to get as close as possible. So if you look at male and female in math, there's only that 1 percentage point difference between males and females in the IAR for math. So that's a really great celebration for us.
And this isn't a way that we've measured progress on our strategic plan in the past in terms of closing an achievement gap. And there's different ways to do that too. You can look at by 8th grade and look at cohorts of students, or you could look at just aggregate numbers. And just, again, this is all available on IllinoisReportCard.com. You can actually go and look at 7th grade math only and look at the achievement gap only in that. So the goal would be, even if the gap starts out bigger in the younger grades, that we're closing it by the time they're in 8th grade, and kind of, there's different ways to, again, look at that and set goals, but that is something we're going to have to talk about.
Correct.
All right, let's move on to board strategic goal 6. We're going to talk about action steps after I'm done with this. So essentially, we think the biggest leading indicator, like I said, coming out of this really, really difficult year, is to look at our climate and culture and make sure that we're creating an environment where all students can be successful here in District 65. So we've created some indicators that we'd like to look at tonight and continue to monitor. So are we able to forward? So we're looking at the percentage of staff who are highly engaged and highly satisfied. Obviously, we want our staff feeling a sense of efficacy here. We're going to look at some of our 5 essentials data that we ask everyone to fill out every year, parents, students, and staff. And then staff perceptions of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in District 65 as measured by part of the Human X survey. So that was an additional survey that we gave to staff earlier in the spring. So this first chart is the 3x3. This is the full district score for Human X. And you can see satisfaction from low to high and engagement from low to high. The red circle is what they call the dream box. That's where we would love to have everybody highly engaged and highly satisfied. Right now, we have a little over 70%, which is actually a really good score. The reason we like Human X is because they give this assessment to a lot of schools too, as well as other industries. And so they can give you a benchmark of how you're doing compared to similar organizations. And the industry standard for education is 60% in the dream box. So we're actually starting off in a really great place, which is not surprising. But we obviously have some areas where we can support and do better with our staff. So we'll talk about those.
Can I
now.
have a quick question? For those, like, do they just ask a question like, do you feel satisfied? Do you, or is it,
It's to what
or is
degree?
it based off?
It's
of
a Likert
your
scale.
reference? Okay.
Yep, it's a Likert scale. And so that what they do is, and we'll go to the next slide, because what they do is break down the data into different dimensions. You can see topics there. And then within each of those dimensions, there's a bunch of questions that get at whether or not, to what degree the person feels that that's true. Okay, so it's a Likert scale of 5 points. And so the closer you are to 5, the better we're doing. And then obviously the closer to 1, not so good. So then we look at top 5 and bottom 5 as strengths and areas of improvement. Top 5 for us as a district is individual, feelings of commitment, pride. There's a sense of belonging question in there. We all know that when we go to work, we want to have at least one person that we feel comfortable engaging with. That's the same for students. And that people feel that in their role, they're doing what they do well and they enjoy what they're doing. So these are strengths we want to keep going. And those are pretty high scores. When you look at areas for improvement, these are the bottom 5. There's always going to be a bottom 5. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. But the bottom 5 here are still within the 3-point range, which is still kind of a neutral score. We're not even below that neutral score. But really what we're talking about is 2 themes. One is that last one, which is consistency with mission and core values, and the fact that whether or not our decisions to staff are being communicated as consistent with what we believe. And so that's something we're talking about as an administrative team. But if you look at that top 4, they all have to do with a relationship or some kind of feedback or communication with the supervisor. And as we're talking about this is not actually surprising because last year, we were not able to engage in the teacher evaluation process. This is actually really positive data for us because teacher evaluation is a really big project. It's a big time commitment for our teachers and principals. But as we can see, that is something that our staff are really craving. They're craving time with their administrator, feedback, coaching. So we think that that's really going to be solved a lot by just getting back to our normal practice of teacher evaluation.
Can I ask one question?
Yep.
Is that data able to be split into elementary and middle?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep. So we have it broken down by elementary and middle, but not further than that.
got it.
We have district office, which is a smaller group, but then we are able to, and we don't want it further than that because we want people to be able to be honest with us. Okay, then our 5 essentials data. We do ask parents to do this, but in order to get some parent data in the results, we have to have 20% of our parents do it. We did not reach that with either elementary or middle. And so what you're looking at are student and staff data. So for elementary, these are the top areas where we feel like we're performing the highest. Some of these are very self-explanatory. We've done a lot of work in the area of safety. Yes.
Back to that 20%, sorry. You had to do it for each child. So did you count it by child or by
The
family?
state counts it. Yeah, they look at their count and then if you don't get enough, they don't include the data. Did you spend all that time doing
Sorry.
that?
No, I did it one
This
time.
time.
Could've
I
carried the
will
whole
admit,
district.
I didn't even do it last
Oh,
year. I
didn't
think
you?
everybody was just.
Oh,
It was a lot. It's a lot. Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry.
Actually, it's really difficult to get 20% of parents to participate in it. So we will continue to try to get the word out on that. But so some of these are very, like I said, self-explanatory. Trust is high, which is great. Peer support for academic work really has to do with kids supporting each other and moving forward. Kids are feeling safe at school, coming to and from school, which is awesome. And then academic personalism is really, that's an excellent one to have in the top 5. It's about differentiated instruction and feeling like the classroom is really designed for the student. So that's really, really great.
I don't know, can I say a question? I don't know if it's a question or just an observation on the previous slide. Can you go back one? The number for safety. I have nothing to compare that. And I guess the same observation applies to all these. I have nothing to compare this to previously
Yeah.
or historically or versus other schools. But that tells me is that saying 29% of the kids don't feel safe in our buildings?
So there are different indicators. So they're talking about outside of school, traveling between home and school, in your classes, in the hallways, or in the bathrooms. Those are the questions that they ask on that indicator. So it could be that some of our students are feeling less safe in certain areas versus other areas, but it does indicate that we're not totally there yet with every single student feeling safe every single place they are. And when you put yourself in a student's position, there are aspects of the day where they might not feel as safe as other places. And so that's something that we continue to work on with our safe and civil schools work and making sure that we have our pause program in place and kids feel comfortable to tell us when they have.
these were answered by the parents. So.
No, these are
Oh, these
students,
are the
students and
student
teachers.
answers. Okay.
Mhm.
Do we know where this safety score fell last year? I'm just curious if maybe some of it had to do with COVID. How they felt safety, how they may not have felt safe at school.
Potentially.
due to COVID.
Context would be really helpful, like
Mhm.
historical or.
I can bring that back.
Compared to other
Well, that's, I mean, if
schools
they,
or-
depending on how they read the question,
Mm-hmm.
it may
Mhm.
be that.
We also at the elementary school have given a specific safety survey that Safe and Civil Schools has written. And it really digs down into those questions and students can answer them in a way that is like smiley faces and sad faces at the younger ages. And then is more like numbers, like a Likert scale in the upper grades, and can really dig down into the bathroom, the bus, the playground, in their classroom, how students are treating each other, how their teachers are treating them, how they're treating their teachers. And then one of the questions is also, do you have an adult that you feel safe to go and talk to if you're having a problem? And so we really dig down into that data too, to look at common areas, to collect more data, change our procedures to make them more safe. Or if an individual student is answering every question that they don't feel safe, that could mean that that student really needs to talk to an adult, maybe a social worker, maybe they have some stress and anxiety that they're just feeling all around, and that we can give them some intervention. So we look at that data in a couple of different ways.
And this is also on a scale. So it's mostly safe, somewhat safe, or very safe.
Is,
So a lot of our students said mostly safe.
is there, does that data get broken down at all demographically? Like, is there a way to see if there's certain groups that feel less safe than others?
No. But I can look back and see if there's tools that I can use in the state system that can get us there.
So I wonder.
So again, and this one is again, like Tracy said, one that we would triangulate with other data that we have. Because these are only our upper grade students that take this assessment too. This isn't necessarily just our younger students.
Correct. The students start at fourth grade, I
grade.
believe.
Fourth grade.
And-
is
Oh, this
elementary.
is just
Fourth and fifth.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, they need to be able to read the assessment on their own, so. And we've also found that for younger students, the word safe means really different things. And so we do, when we have done the safety survey, we talk a little bit about just what that word means so that they can answer the questions a little bit more accurately.
So the question, Tracy, not to beat that horse, on the safe, there's a question in there about, do you feel like there's someone in the school that you can
Mhm.
go talk to?
Mhm.
So if they don't, that would bring that score down.
Yeah, so what we do is collect the names of those students and then have either their teacher or a social worker reach out to them individually. First, make sure they understood what that question was asking.
Yeah.
And then talk through like let's talk through and maybe think about some people that might be a person you could connect with. If they really can't come up with somebody, then we need to work with maybe a mentor teacher that can start connecting with them regularly, pick out one of their specials teachers that can start making an individual connection, or find some way within the building to align that student with an adult that they can trust.
We've also implemented the Bloom check-in with students every week as well, which is a very basic check-in to make sure kids feeling ready for school. They don't need to talk to anybody. And so we have multiple measures in place to make sure that we connect with kids if they're not feeling good.
Do they still do that every morning?
Not every morning, but we have gone to once a week.
Yeah, it's a few times a week at the elementary school and at least once per week at the middle school. And so it does also have a similar question in there so that we can identify students who might need a check-in right away with an adult.
Great.
So some of the areas we're working on at elementary, and most of these are coming from the teacher practices. So we're talking about PD. Quality of student discussion has to do with whether or not kids are getting into critical thinking or they're moving each other to a place where they're really deeply discussing issues. Instructional leadership could have to do a lot with a lot of different things. And again, this is a year where things were changing and a lot was up in the air. Collaborative practices, whether or not there's protocols and time for teachers to work together. And then teacher influence has to do with whether or not teachers feel they have a voice in aspects of the school and district. And so that's something that we're taking into consideration as well.
PD has been an issue for
Yeah.
ever and ever and ever.
And then for middle school, again, some really great celebrations here. To have a middle school where kids are feeling like it's very personalized for them is a really big celebration. Kids are supporting each other, math instruction. Academic press has to do with teacher expectations. Teachers expect students to do their best and meet academic standards, which I think is great. Having high expectations, there's a ton of research around how that impacts students in a really positive way. And then finally, collective responsibility. We all feel like we are all helping all the students, which is
Can you
great.
discuss academic personalism again? What is that?
That's individualizing instruction. So the differentiation part, which is pretty amazing to see in a middle school. So a really big celebration.
Great.
And then when we look at
Survey the
areas,
community about that, just to-
oh, very good. Yeah, there's some data. And then looking at these areas where we need to address some things, collaborative practices, as you can see, showed up in both areas. So that's a district-wide piece that we're going to be talking about. Again, quality of discussion. There's a little bit of parent involvement, which we know, parents tend to back off a little bit once kids get into middle school, but that's a teacher perception that we're missing some of that. We can do some more outreach there.
So this is teachers.
Yes.
Answering this right now.
Yep, and then instructional leadership, which appears in both, and then teacher influence, again, just teachers feeling like they have a voice and have a seat at the table for decision making.
So were there student answers?
So what
that
they
were
do is
low?
rank all the answers, teacher and student, and give us top and bottom.
So it's interesting. It seems like at both schools, the top ones were all like from kid perspective a little bit. And then the bottoms were from the teachers that maybe the questions weren't fully understood by the kids to have a negative response to,
It's possible.
We
Again,
all
things
get
for us to
jaded
dig
with
into.
age too, right? Kids are always-
And really nothing is, nothing is super surprising on these slides either. We know there's some things that we need to work on and we've been receiving feedback in other areas. So this is just another piece
Is
of
it,
data.
well, is that really being clean with the data by ranking the kids, combining that list of teacher and kid responses and ranking them? Like, I would say, if you could show me the teachers top and bottom and the kids top and bottom, that would make sense. But I don't think, that's apples and oranges, it feels like.
And I think the philosophy behind it is that it's a collaborative piece. We all work together to make the school work the way it works. And so what they do is visualize it as a puzzle, and that all the pieces have to kind of fit together to be organized for success. So they
This is
talk
the
about,
state administered,
yes,
right?
they
So
talk
it's-
about
we
more
can't-
implementation, less implementation, and how well you're focused towards being successful. And they try to take in all the data into consideration and then put the pieces of the puzzle together. So.
I guess if you had benchmarks, something to compare it to, I could tease some useful information out there. But without that, I'm kind of struggling with this.
And again, that's something we can look at. If that human X data becomes more of a important data point for us and we feel it's more actionable, then that's what we'll lean on. But it's always nice to have extra pieces. All right, and we're going to move on to the diversity, equity, and inclusion part of the survey that we did with staff. And so as a full district, the strengths that we noticed from our staff, again, really high scores in the area of personal commitment. We have a lot of teachers who are very invested in the work of equity, feeling like they want to be a positive contributor. They're embracing that idea that they want us to be an equitable district, modeling respect and kindness and valuing inclusion efforts. So on the top end, sort of personal commitment. And then not too surprisingly, in the areas where we want to improve, we're looking more at an organizational structure commitment. So can we move forward on that one? Those next areas are really all about our organization and the fact that maybe we haven't been super clear about a belief tied to action, and that maybe we aren't being very transparent about valuing and respecting diversity of opinion and viewpoints, cultures. And so we know this. This is the work that we're trying to do through the Thrive Task Force and through that work. But again, we're still talking about within that neutral range. So these aren't super low scores, but our staff are definitely seeing a difference between their own personal commitment and what they've recognized as the district level commitment or articulation of an action plan.
All right, so action steps for improvement. So in terms of board goal 1, this year we added one staff member as a math interventionist at the elementary school. You saw through the data that math is an area that we really want to focus on and build up student learning. Our multi-tiered systems of support, we're doing a review cycle to create improvements for our multi-tiered systems of support. That would be in reading, writing, and math. So that builds our interventions for students who need extra time and support in those areas. We'll be completing a curriculum audit, so that will look at our curriculum and make sure that our tier 1 curriculum is addressing the needs of all of our students. We know that a return to in-person instruction, a return to differentiation, small group instruction, one-to-one conferencing, all the things that we know that our teachers do best are going to support our students in this coming year. And so we expect to see increases in our data from all of those good teaching practices that we know we've been able to do in the past.
And for board goal 6, as you also know, we have additional personnel working in the area of social emotional learning. They're focused really heavily on tier 1, or what's happening with all of our students in the classroom, specifically at the middle school with respect to advisory. Again, like we talked about, re-engagement with the teacher evaluation process. We're working on different ways to communicate with staff, weekly newsletters, more email communication and opportunities to participate. We will be working on teacher collaboration protocols throughout the year, making sure that we're using our team time effectively. We have instituted new culture and climate committees at both buildings that will be anchored in the HumanX data specifically, and looking at action steps to improve those pieces. And then obviously we begin our Thrive committee tomorrow night with a presentation for the entire community, looking at just the data that you just saw now, and introducing the purpose of the committee as being one that will help us with common vocabulary, will help us with family and community role in terms of equity, and kind of keeping us on pace with doing some work internally and externally in the area of equity.
Thanks for that. That was really comprehensive and helpful. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you putting all that together.
Thanks for fielding all the questions.
A lot of material. Thanks.
All right, no questions?
I think we asked.
You think of any, let me know.
Thank you. I actually have a question about Thrive tomorrow night. How do we watch that or join that or access that?
So it should be on our website, on the Thrive. There's a new webpage, the Thrive webpage. Everyone that's on the committee has gotten a link to be a panelist. And I will specifically send it out to the board.
It is, I searched in the search box on our website for Thrive, and it goes to us, it says it's under construction, but it does have a link on it.
Well, full disclosure, I have not searched for it yet. so
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll send it out.
All right, so we're going to move on to, is this our last discussion item? It's a big one, fairly big discussion item for the evening on the press policy updates. For those watching who aren't familiar, press is a service we subscribe to from the Illinois Association of School Boards, which helps us keep our policy manual current and in line with all of the legislative changes that go on in the state. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Let's see, the Policy Review Committee met on September 2nd and reviewed the policies below. The policies are being presented to the board for a first read, and this will be brought back for a final approval on the September 8th board meeting. By my count, that Policy Review Committee reviewed 18 policies, 12 of which they're recommending to accept as is. And if anybody's interested in looking in the board packet, the changes are outlined either in color or I was going to say red line, but they're not red lined. It's color highlights. Yeah. And then there are 6, I think, which might need some clarification or discussion. Before we get into the ones that need discussion, does anybody in the policy, first of all, thank you to the policy committee for this. It's a lot of work. I appreciate it. Is there any of those first 12 that you're recommending to accept as is? Any comment or anything that anybody wanted to add to that? And then there's 6 others. I guess I'll let you lead us.
Sure. Yep. And this was again in your packet, so there was some background information already. We're just going to pull out a few in case there's any questions. So policy 4:50 payment procedures. This is just a suggested change to allow the district to pay bills in the event that we are not able to have a board meeting, specifically like during a global pandemic. We want to continue to pay bills, but there's some provisions in there where all the board members would be sent the bills in advance, and you could pull out anything that you would want to reserve for discussion, but we would then be able to continue to pay our bills even without a meeting.
My only question is, that's been vetted by our attorney? Because I was always under the impression that we had to approve them ahead of you doing anything, so. We can do this in,
Yes, and they need to be approved in an open board meeting, so the procedure allows the board to review them, and if they have any concerns, pull them. And then they can be paid. It's sort of like the Impress report where you're retroactively approving them, so we would come and present them to the board at the next open meeting. You'd present and you'd approve them in public.
is there anything, any limitations, like the first line, is in the event that the regular meeting is canceled in a particular month due to exigence, a pretty broad term, exigent circumstances? Is there any definitions surrounding exigent, like limitations to that, like pandemic, governor's executive orders declaring a state of emergency, or is that up to us to determine what is exigent?
I think it's
Can't even say the
things
word.
beyond our control. So if we decided to cancel the meeting, we couldn't just cancel it and then do it. It would have to be something where there was a weather event or a pandemic.
I'm
or
just playing
something.
devil's advocate.
Yep.
If that needs to be clarified.
I don't think we want to make it too narrow. Right? So that it could apply in any.
Well, there's always,
situation
every time you try to clarify something more specifically, you leave something out that then comes up.
Right, exactly.
But
Yeah, and this would, obviously only be used in emergency circumstances. It's our typical policy is to bring all bills to the board for payment.
Okay, for 6:262, the private tutoring services, we have a little bit of a question for the group on this one. So we definitely need to remove the language that we will provide an informational list of employees who are willing to tutor, because the goal of that policy prior to this was to remove the district from interaction with the tutoring agreements between parents and teachers. It was a suggestion by your subcommittee to add some language in there that would be consistent with the ethical policy of, if there is going to be a tutoring arrangement, that would be notified, that we would notify administrators. It would be on the tutor to notify the administrative team that there is a tutoring arrangement happening so that we could be aware. The question I want to bring to the board is I think it's a little bit of a mixed message. So if we don't want to be involved at all with the tutoring arrangements, I'm not sure that we want to be notified either in the event that something happens within that agreement between parent and teacher and student. If we're notified, then we are actually involved as being notified, if that makes sense. So the question for the group is whether we want to leave it as we don't want to be involved, or do we want to put a provision in there asking for teachers to inform us when there's an arrangement made?
if there's a tutoring arrangement between a student and our employee, even if it's their own arrangement, and we don't require them to notify us, but something happens, we're still going to be blamed for it. Right? I mean,
I thought the same thing.
they're our
and
employee.
I see where the legal side of it comes in, but the other side is like we're one more safety net for the kids. So it's one more thing that, like, a double check for the teacher or the student would have to go through, and the parents. So I look at it from that point of view, that we could be of help and maybe stop a situation that could occur, that
Yeah, by not getting notified, it seems a little bit like we're taking it, put your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't
Yeah.
exist kind of thing. And that feels irresponsible.
So if we are being notified, what are we going to do with the information? Are we going to confirm with the parent? Like, what is our action step for being notified?
And what's the purpose? I think that's,
Mhm.
why do we need to know?
Why add that step?
to keep everyone in check of there are policies based on, like, you as a teacher can't tutor your student
Mhm.
in special circumstances. And so there's a lot of checks, and it would just kind of keep everything, in my opinion, in balance. And it would just be a running list that we would have. Again, it's just the being in the know, not that we would have to do anything with that information, but
Yeah, I
think
see what
there's-
you're saying, but I would argue that if we are notified, then we need to do some sort of, we need to do something with that information. Otherwise, we're not actually preventing anything
Right,
or
that's not, yeah.
observe,
point,
you
right.
know, paying attention to anything, but then we also are on the hook for knowing.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
I guess
I
I would
hear
just-
you.
Yeah, like a contract. of
So,
some
but
sort,
so what's so are you saying that, is that an argument for not knowing their name? Because I still think it's putting your head in the sand and pretending it doesn't
Right.
exist if you don't.
It's not an
So
argument
maybe
for
we,
not knowing it,
you're
but it's
either in or
saying-
you're not in at all, or you're all in, and you need to have a checklist that has an HR kind of function that we go down and say, you're tutoring this kid and we're gonna check this, and this periodically or something.
Yes, you're either all.
That's
in or
beyond my
you're all out.
scope of what I can recommend specifically, but there seems to me there needs to be some kind of administrative.
That what you're talking about is administrative procedure, which would not be encompassed in the policy, but could be developed after if we wanted the district to keep a record of based on notifications from the teacher. And obviously, we would
and
be,
the parent. I feel like it would be a notification on both ends, that they both have agreed to this tutoring, so that it's not the teacher just asking the child to do something and letting us know. It would be like a mutual agreement that they're both.
Has our lawyer
Yeah.
chimed in on that opinion?
everyone handles tutoring very, very differently. And there's,
I just think if we were keeping that list, then that would be somebody's job to keep that list. And then there would be responsibility beyond just writing down that information.
Well, my guess is it changes a lot. It
Mhm.
changes during the school year, during the summer. You might, tutor a student for a couple months and then stop. Like, it sounds
So
like
there would need to be procedures, like when do you take someone off?
But we
When do you have
haven't
them
been
on?
keeping a list for a lot of years.
Yeah, I'm still struggling to find out why, the why.
Why we
Like, what
don't
are we
keep a
trying
list?
to prevent? Are we trying to prevent a teacher from breaching their contract by tutoring one of their students? Or are we trying to prevent some sort of abuse and neglect type thing?
Are you
And if
talking
so,
about the
how are
list?
we actually doing that by having a list? I think that's why are we adding this
What's the
stuff?
purpose
I
of
think
the
it's, I mean, I'll just say I'm mostly concerned about like an inappropriate relationship between a teacher and a child. And so from all of my terrible podcasts that I listen to and whatnot, it's a secret, it's this. So if you have to put something out there and have your supervisor know that you're doing something, the parent knows that you guys are tutoring or helping them out with reading or something of that nature. It's just that one more thing that it might be, they don't want that situation.
More eyes on the situation, right?
Yeah, I totally see
Yeah.
it from both sides though.
Yeah.
Legally, where do we draw the line?
Well, I know we didn't keep, I was on this board when we decided to no longer keep a list. And my memory is vague. That was a long time ago. Jay, was that before you were here? Yeah, and I see, Nate, you might be able to chime in on that. I mean, it had to do with like, we were afraid of the liability, right? Of recommending people for. It goes way back.
Exposing ourselves to liability if we're in the know. I'm not against it, but that is.
I don't think we're not exposing ourselves to liability if we're not in the know either, though. If our employee is tutoring and we don't know it and something goes wrong, I think we're still in trouble.
But is that true with like outside coaching, sporting event? Like, where do you draw the line on that? Because
School. coaching.
We have that in, and this is kind of why I think we need to add this language, even though it contradicts other stuff what's in the policy. We have language in a ethics policy about notifying a principal or superintendent if you're doing something socially with a student outside of school. So in my opinion, this kind of just is consistent with that because it's a different activity, but it's an activity outside of the school building between a teacher and one of our staff members. So it just seems, I don't know, it just seems like someone should be made aware of it because I feel that relationship likely began at our schools.
And there's two parts to this. The original list was we were providing a list to parents saying, hey, these teachers are tutor available.
Yeah.
And that like we crossed off.
Right.
But now the conversation is more like when the teacher has outside of school relationships or goes to a sporting events, do we need to know about that stuff? Because it's,
So the language in specific is policy 5:120. No district employee shall engage in any social activity or have any social relationships with students outside of school unless the employee notifies the superintendent or a principal in advance.
I agree with Tim's point. I think it should be, we need to be aware. We can't not be aware of these things.
Okay, so then if we put that language in, then how do we, then we have to also.
We
put
have to
something in
develop
the
a procedure.
Okay.
Yep, so we'll work on a procedure if that's, so what we'll do is draft that up with the new language and that'll be for our second read.
But at
So-
that point, like I was saying before, if it's for a social event or it's for tutoring, what if there's somebody who's coaching outside of school, coaching like Park District T-ball, or like
A
it's either
teacher
all-
who's,
yeah, a teacher who's doing some of those other, coaching a summer camp or lifeguarding the pool, like, I feel like it's gotta, if that's what we're worried about, it needs, how do you encompass all that? I
well,
totally
that would
agree.
be a
Keeping
social,
kids-
wouldn't that be a social thing?
Not if it's their job. it's
Yeah.
not.
And we have many teachers who live in the community.
Yeah.
that's what
who-
we talked about. It was a weird line
Yeah.
of like, hey, I'm walking down the street and I see you, or we have a block party and you're
Yeah.
there,
Yeah,
you know.
it's-
So
right.
And does
there's,
it become
Where does
cumbersome
that draw
for
the
the
line?
teacher? Because we don't want to create
no, I
that.
want to welcome them to
Right.
stay in the community. It wouldn't, right?
Well, I think the crux of the social issue had to do with the one-on-one relationship. A lot of what you're referring to is not going to be one-on-one, which I think is a safety check built into those things.
Right.
But
But tutoring is.
We can draft something that would try to capture the fact that we're talking about an individual student-teacher relationship outside of school.
because we don't allow it to occur on grounds either, right?
No. No.
I believe.
We'll try to draft something. I think we have enough in there for the second read. Okay, 2:125, board member compensation. I don't know, Jay, if you have anything on this. I think this is just to make sure.
Yeah.
I want a sweatshirt.
Yeah,
There's a spirit.
we're happy to do that. I don't think, we don't have any concerns about that. We just want to make sure we're consistent with the,
I like
The law.
how this policy was changed from just adding the, I don't know, it,
More specific.
yeah, I like how it was worded.
It very rarely
Mhm.
is even necessary to apply. I mean,
Correct.
occasionally you have a few expenses if you go to the conference downtown,
Mhm.
but that's it.
I think that's what it's
Yeah.
about. There's no questions. Policy 5:330 just addresses.
Can I just say
Yes,
something for
yes,
the enormous viewing public that
yes,
we have?
please.
Board members do not get paid anything, just so people know. There is
Just
no,
respect.
there is no, and hopefully we earn
And
some,
admiration.
some karma is what I'm hoping
Yes,
for.
yes.
But just to be
Thank you.
clear.
It's a
so-
volunteer.
So people are aware, we don't get paid
Right.
at all.
5:330, sick days, vacation and leaves. This is just including the Juneteenth and Election Day holidays. And then procedurally, we are removing 2 waiver days for 12-month employees. If I want to, we don't necessarily have to, but it's at the discretion of superintendent. So we're trying to keep on pace, even though we've had these new holidays added, because we've had some flexibility in there before. So with these new holidays, our 12-month employees will have essentially almost the same schedule.
So you're not asking if we should include those or not?
We are including them.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because we waive some of the holidays that some other districts take. And so by including these, we're really on the same page.
As long as we hit our required number of days in a year, whatever works for our faculty.
4:42, the continuing disclosure policy. Jay's going to have to describe this one.
So this is a policy that was written by our bond council, and it's recommended that each district have a disclosure policy. It's something that rating agencies and investors look for. Continuing disclosure is something that once we issue bonds, we basically need to continually disclose any important events to the bondholders in a timely fashion. So there's a list of probably a dozen things where if this happens, an example might be we miss a bond payment. That's something that investors want to know about. This district has not made all their bond payments timely. And that's something that we're required to do. And we also within a certain time after the end of the fiscal year, we need to publish our financial results, things like that. And so this policy is just lays out who's responsible and how we're going to do it. And it's something that those parties look for when they're deciding whether to issue our bonds and how much and what interest rates we should get, what our bond rating should be.
It seems consistent with the conversations we've had over the years about transparency and being forthright with everything we do. So see a reason why we should, other than the workload, it probably adds to your.
Well, it's something we're required to do anyway, regardless of whether we have a policy or not. This is just something that when a rating agency is looking at the district and checking off the boxes and saying how they already have a procedure in place, a policy in place, so we're confident that they're going to meet their obligation.
Makes sense.
And the last one is a relevant policy for right now about face coverings. This would be one that we took a look at some policies that other districts have adopted given the current circumstances, and we felt this would be appropriate to include in our policy update should we ever need to enforce mask wearing under the governor's order, executive order. And we do have some flexibility once there is flexibility granted to us within this policy.
Vetted by our attorneys.
Yes.
Do we, this is not important, but do we need to have the like YouTube links in the policy on how to make a mask? Is that
I don't think so. I
necessary?
thought we took.
I
out the
thought we took
YouTube
those
links.
out,
Yeah.
didn't we?
No,
Yeah.
that's still there.
We're gonna need to take those out because we don't want the DIY.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It is.
Yep, thanks,
interesting.
Tim.
I remember when those.
That
first
was
came
a
out.
discussion.
How do you make a mask out of your bandana?
Yeah.
So that is it for first read.
Any other comments on any of those policies? Thank you for all that, guys. That's a lot of work. So that's it for our discussion items for the evening. We now offer the opportunity for anybody in the audience or on Zoom or by written comment to offer public comment. Well, there's nobody in the audience. Shelley, if you can hear me, do we have any Zoom comment or a written comment?
We have no public comments on the Google form and nothing in Zoom.
Thanks, Shelley. Anything from the board? Final comments from the board? If not hearing any, thank you, everybody, for attending, and may I have a motion to adjourn at 8:48.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
I.
Anybody opposed?